Hi, everyone, and welcome to Consulting with Authority. My name is Scott Cantrell. I am joined by a new friend of mine, someone that I have gotten to know over the last several weeks. And it was pretty clear from my first conversation with him that if he was willing, he needed to be a guest on the podcast. And so today I have the honor of introducing Adam Anderson from the other side of the Atlantic, joining us a little bit later in the day than it is for me. Adam Anderson is a principal at ExecutiveHQ. You can learn more about that organization at ExecHQ.com. He's an international consultant with 35 years of professional experience. The first part of his career, he served as an executive, sort of climbing the ladder in his organization and multiple organizations, and has served as a consultant in a variety of different areas of expertise, and we'll touch on a lot of those today. But it served a lot of different roles in terms of delivering results as a consultant in a lot of different industries. To name just a few: finance, medical, healthcare, IT, manufacturing, and so forth. So he has a very, very broad scope of experience across industry, serving primarily small to medium-sized companies, helping support their growth efforts and make them into better organizations. I'm excited to be joined by Adam today. Adam, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Scott.
Excellent. And Adam, I touched on just a little bit, just a thimbleful of who you are and what your background is, but I'd love to learn more about your career. And you don't have to give us the full treatise on it, but maybe spend 2, 3, 4 minutes sort of describing your trajectory and how you got to where you are in terms of being this international consultant that is able to work with organizations all around the world effectively.
I'm not sure trajectory is the right word. I certainly haven't gone to space. I've just been at the level where small planes fly. But I am an engineer by education, civil engineer specifically, and my specialty there was management of large engineering projects. So out of there, I joined an engineering firm and was a project manager, a firm on Route 128 around Boston. From there, I went to get my MBA. From there, Wall Street, and then a big international consultancy. Then a number of interim executive level projects. First for relatively small companies with just under 100 people, and then companies somewhat bigger. After about 10, 15 years of that, I returned to consulting. Initially again with big international firms, and then on my own and with small groups of colleagues. I've done it initially only in the US, then some projects in Europe, where I actually moved because of some projects. So I've done projects in Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Northern Europe, Central Europe. The only part I didn't do is Southern Europe. Too hot for me. But over the last 10 years, I think most of my time has been spent on US clients. A good part of that was private equity firms and the portfolio companies.
Excellent. Okay. Very good. So you've kind of been on all sides of this consulting equation, from the standpoint of being an early project manager, and then going through getting your MBA, going through the ropes of being an executive and being a consultant in a large consulting space, and then doing more independent style consulting. And now I think you've found an area, I don't want to put words in your mouth, found an area where you really enjoy and you can be fulfilled and you can live life on your own terms. And you sort of created this model consulting business. I think for a lot of the listeners or watchers of this episode, they would look at the position and the career that you've had, and they were like, if I could parallel that in certain ways, that would consider that success. Describe, if you wouldn't mind, what an average project, if there is such a thing, what a standard project looks like for you now as a consultant when you are brought in to work with an organization or work with a group of people. Most often, what are those organizations looking for? How do you deliver value is a simpler way to ask the question.
Mm-hmm. Happy to answer this, but you said something about being on both sides of the consulting equation, and I actually remembered I hired first consultants as a project manager in my first year after college. And actually, the reason I hired them is so that they would sell the message that I wanted to sell, but I was too young to carry the weight. So I convinced my bosses to hire Booz Allen Hamilton to deliver the message. So yes, I have been on both sides. Now, the average project, it's a little difficult to say. I mean, the most recent project I did, I was doing due diligence on a U.S. company somewhere in the Midwest, providing industrial services to companies in the energy sector and construction sector. Mm-hmm. And I was doing due diligence for a private equity company, which wanted to buy this firm and wanted to see its market, its competitors, wanted to see if it made sense to make some follow-on acquisitions that possibly could be merged with this one to create greater value. And this project lasted for 10 days, full time. A project which I ended last year, on the other hand, lasted for 21 months. And that was a very different project with more hands-on role for me, because I was leading the cost-cutting effort at a decent-sized manufacturing company in Europe. And this was a company in a very stable business, mining and chemical processing of what they mined. About 15 factories in 5 different countries. And the objective was to increase income by reducing costs, and there we were able to triple the income of the company during the project. So a 2-week project and a 21-month project. These are among the 4 most recent projects that I have done. So there is a variety to the duration and also to the nature of it. But in both cases, these are strategic projects. So they deal with either a strategic decision, in this case, to buy or not to buy a company, and possibly to buy or not to buy other companies in the same industrial space. Or to greatly increase the key metric, which is the bottom line. Understood.
Very good. So let's go one step further here, because we've had a lot of interesting conversations, but one of the key takeaways, I think it was from our previous conversation or maybe the one prior, we were talking about the concept of business development and your particular model now. In terms of how you go about identifying or how potential clients of yours go about identifying you, how you get in touch with them. And I think this model that you've created, this strategic partnership networked model, is very, very interesting. And certainly a lot of the viewers or listeners of the podcast are going to have their own networks of referral partners or strategic partners, et cetera. But you've really, I think, made this your primary, almost sole model for business development. And it's served you well for a very long time. If you wouldn't mind, I'd love for you to sort of talk about how that strategy, came to be for you, how you've evolved it, and what that looks like today. Because I will tell you something you already know, which is for folks in our space, whether independent consultants or small boutique consulting firms, or even medium regional size consultancies, one of the most common challenges and objectives they have is I want to improve the quality and quantity of the number of opportunities that I have available to me. Whether I say yes or no is ultimately up to me. It may or may not be a good fit, but I'd love for people to know about me and have those meaningful conversations. You've been able to do that through a network of strategic partnerships. So maybe just sort of talk about how that started and the evolution of that particular strategy.
Well, it actually started pretty simply. I mean, if you don't have one leg, you use crutches and you walk with crutches. And since I don't have one leg, I needed crutches. Now, for a consultant to be successful, he needs 2 relevant assets. One is skills, the other one is relationships. Skills is what we are able to do for the client. So let's say you are a CPA and you audit the books, or you are an expert in financial analysis and you process financial numbers in an Excel spreadsheet, or you are black belt in Six Sigma and you improve processes. Okay, so these are skills, and you may be looking for clients who need those skills at this particular time. So it's as if you had a key and we're looking for locks that will fit the key.
Mm-hmm.
The other asset is relationships. You know key decision makers, or you know people who know the decision makers and may put you in front of them. You either have a relationship with these decision makers, or you are able to develop such a relationship so that you can talk to the person about his or her needs, business needs. And so that is the relationship side of the story. Right? Now, this is as if you had the lock, that is the client, and you are looking for the key. Now, it may just happen that this particular lock fits the key that you have. Mm-hmm. More likely than not, the client has a number of needs, and none of them is one that you can fulfill, but you have the relationship. So then you look for the key to fit that lock. You have a client, the client has a need, and your job is to fulfill that need, is to solve the question or help him take advantage of the opportunity. So then you look for others who will help you in this venture. So the business model that I have been using since I am not exactly what you would call a master in human relationships and cold calling and wining and dining the client. I have the skills which I developed over the last 35 years, and I know people who have the other, the missing part of the equation, who have the relationships, and it doesn't have to be many relationships, and they are able to identify the need, and if I'm, for example, able to fulfill that need, they bring me into the picture, and then we perform the project together. He may be the principal one selling the project, I may be the principal one producing the project. We share the fees. I don't call it a referral business, because a referral is you call me and you say, look, here is a business card, call this guy. Mm-hmm. He may have a need of your services. What I am talking about is cooperation, is working together as a team. And that is what I have been doing for almost 20 years since I left Accenture. Actually, before I left Accenture, I was doing it too. In fact, my very first big consultancy, which was KPMG, one of the big four, mm-hmm. I was in the LA office, and this concept of the two legs worked greatly there. I had some skills, or I didn't have the skills. I had the talent. I was too young to have the skills, mm-hmm. But I had the talent. I had some education, and there were audit partners. I was in the consulting department. They were in the audit department. They brought me their relationships. They knew clients. They had clients. They did audit work for these clients, and while they were doing the audit work, especially while they were wining and dining, their underlings were doing the audit work. They talked not just about audit, but about other things, about the business. And they learned things that they couldn't do anything about, but there was the consulting department in KPMG which could. Mm-hmm. So they came to me and said, look, can you go join me, meet with the client, because I think he has a need that you can fulfill. And every time we went to the client, we came out with an engagement. We shared the fees, the audit partner and I, so both of us were happy. And the client was happy because he had a one-stop shop. He didn't have to look into different companies, one for audit, one for whatever he needed, some strategic advice or a project. He could do it all in one company. Yep. And that's essential, is this concept of one-stop shopping, of providing full service to your client.
So that last note in particular is something that I think is incredibly valid and valuable. One of the things that, and I'll speak for myself, I think I probably represent a lot of the listeners and viewers too. One of the things I've been trying to do over the last 18 months or so is to start to build or continue to build. I have certain experts and consultants and strategists in my network, people who I know, like, and trust already. I would trust them to work with me on a project, or they would trust me to bring me into a project, and we have a good, understanding, appreciation of each other's respective talents and skills. But I realize that even within that network that I have, there are missing links. There are gaps and holes that I currently cannot fill or fulfill like I would want to for the client if they had those challenges or issues. And so one of the things I've been trying to do is to create that situation where if I'm speaking to a given organization, almost regardless of what their need or challenge is, even though I am targeting, in my outreach, I am targeting organizations that are likely to have certain challenges or needs. I may find out something else in my due diligence with them about what their issues are. So this concept, I hadn't really thought about it using that phrase, but it's exactly correct. Allowing yourself as the consultant and advisor, the one who has the relationship, the initial original relationship, you become the one-stop shop, right? You don't have to be a KPMG necessarily that has, all these different divisions. You can still be an independent or a boutique consultancy. And as long as you know the right people who can do a good job, of course, you are in effect playing that role of one-stop shop, because if there is a need or challenge that the client has, you know who they should talk to. And ultimately the client can choose to engage in that role with them or not, but at least you are providing a solution for the client, even though it may not be your own personal expertise. And I think this model is something that is incredibly, I know it's incredibly valuable just in the limited experience that I've had with it. But I also think it's something that is somewhat overrated. I think that certain consultants, they want to stay in their lane. And I think what I'm hearing you say, and what I'm starting to understand even more clearly, is I can stay in my lane. I don't have to go be an expert in all things, or, a jack of all trades and a master of none. I can stay in my master lane, but still fulfill the needs and desires of my client in all these other areas, so long as I can identify those other individual experts. So related to that point, obviously having the career that you've had has been helpful in terms of identifying and cultivating these types of relationships. Let me ask this question. What advice would you give to someone like me, who is, not starting out, but we haven't had a super, don't have the experience that you have. We haven't been in the business as long as you have. We don't have the size network that you have. What would you recommend to someone who wants to build out that network of experts in terms of identifying those individuals and potentially cultivating those relationships? What has your experience been, and what recommendations might you give?
First of all, you referred to the concept of jack of all trades. In other words, the consultant becoming an expert in everything, so that he can be a one-stop shop, being a one-person orchestra. When I was a student at MIT, I remember folks in Cambridge saying that the difference between MIT and Harvard is that at MIT, they teach you more and more about less and less until you know everything about nothing. And at Harvard, they teach you less and less about more and more until you know nothing about everything.
I hadn't heard that before. We pull quotes out of the podcast, Adam. That's going to be one of them. Thank you.
It's not my quote. It's pretty popular there in Massachusetts. But anyhow, so these are the two extremes, and obviously none of the two extremes is a good one. So right after I graduated from MIT, I set a number of classes at Harvard. I was actually admitted to the MBA program there. So because I believe that the truth is somewhere in the middle. But yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, if you do want to be a trusted advisor, a strategic advisor to your client, you can do that. But learning everything that the client needs is not a good way of doing it. I mean, I've been at it for 35 years, but I would not be able to do what you, Scott, are doing. I would not be able to do what that audit partner was doing, even though I played the role of CFO in several companies, but I couldn't audit the books.
Right.
That requires specialized knowledge that I just never possessed. And when I was 23 years old, I was running a project, the objective of which was to select and implement a new enterprise resource planning system, an ERP system, for a major electronics manufacturer. And because of that, I had to get a lot of knowledge about these systems and about IT in general. Today, I don't have that technical knowledge, or I have the knowledge, but things moved forward in IT over the 40 years. So I would not be able to do that. And certainly not as well as I was when I was 23. So my point is that I don't try to become a jack of all trades. I don't try to learn everything. I am strictly focused on the things that I do best, and that also means that I don't try to become a relationship builder, a rainmaker. Mm-hmm. In other words, I don't try to learn how to win projects, because that is just not my forte. I rely on my partners to do that. Now, going back to your question, if you are young in the business, how do you find these folks who can satisfy the client's needs? That's actually relatively easy, given that we have Link, and I am aware of a number of companies that sell these consultants by the dozen. So intermediaries, a little bit like executive search folks, but what they are searching for is consultants and for a project duration, not forever. So I think the key here is that each of us knows a client, a prospect, well enough to be able to talk to him. It may not be 100 clients or prospects, it may be one prospect, or it may be 10 prospects. But that is something that if I were relatively young, I'd focus on. And then once I can, because a relationship with, for example, the owner of a business which employs 100 people or 500 people, it's possible to establish that relationship even if you are 25 years old. It will not be a relationship of equals, but it will be. But it can be a relationship. I remember having relationships with my rabbis, where I was the mentee and he was the mentor, and then after a while it switched, and I was the mentor, and unfortunately people around me were younger than I rather than older. But if you can develop such a relationship, if you can gain the trust, identify those needs that the client may have, and then try to befriend somebody like myself or somebody like Scott, who has access to people, because you don't have to have access to 10 people. It's enough if you have access to one person who has access to 10 people. Sure. The right people, right? So somebody who moves in this environment, in this milieu, and then by talking, I mean, I do have people coming to me and saying, "Look, I know this guy, and he has the following problem, or the following opportunity, or the following issue," and then we talk. I suggest some questions that my colleague asked his prospect, and so there's basically communication between me and the potential client, but the communication is through the through my colleague,
right.
through the rainmaker. And in fact, we together are doing the business development, are doing the due diligence that you mentioned, and the business development work. I may be doing it behind the scenes. He is doing it in front. So he is wining and dining. I'm doing the hard work. The intellectual work. He's doing the pleasant work. But we are working together in the business development process. And then sometimes an engagement comes out of it.
Sure.
And then I become the front guy, the principal provider.
Yep. I thank you for that. And I was taking notes as you were going through it. One of the key takeaways, I think, for me is this affirmation and perhaps somewhat of a realization in that it's not necessarily about the quantity or size of the network that you have, right? It really is about the quality of the relationship that you have within the network. Because as you cite, one person can be attached to or create multiple opportunities. And especially if you extrapolate and multiply that over a period of time, like significant time, 2, 5, 10, 12, 20 years, then if those relationships with another rainmaking style consultant, someone who has, the clientele, or someone who is an executive of a business, and you can befriend them over time, those relationships are, I can cite examples in my own career, short though it may be, those relationships have already paid major dividends simply because they were created and they were properly cultivated over time.
I mean, let's do a simple math exercise.
Okay.
Let's say the business owner of a company that has 10 million in revenues in the top line. So that's probably a company that's got employment in 2 digits, mid to high 2 digits.
Right.
Okay. So that's not the smallest company, but it's not a big one either. So $10 million in revenues. Let's say they have average profitability, which is, let's say, $1.2 million, so 12%. Okay. And if I step in, I can probably double the bottom line. So move it up by $1.2 million. Now, the average price to earnings these days is a little bit over 10 in private equity. So let's say it's 10. So that means that the two of us, the rainmaker and the producer, myself, produced a value of $12 million.
Right.
Let's say it took us half a year. So $12 million for half a year. And let's say our arrangement with the client, our financial arrangement with the client, is that we split this value 90% he, 10% we. So we just earned $1.2 million working for half a year. Actually, I was working for half a year. My rainmaker did not work for half a year because, you cannot wine and dine the client for half a year. Right. You'd get indigestion. So you're probably off, schmoozing
working on other clients. Yeah.
Yes, schmoozing other prospects. But 1.2 million, and let's say we split it 1 to 4, so 20% he for the selling and for 80% I for the. So 20% of 1.2, that's $240,000 for wining and dining one prospect. How many of those do you need in order to make your mortgage payments and take your wife to dinner once a week?
Right.
So you don't need big numbers.
Right.
You just need to the quality. The quality is more important than quantity. Having 100 prospects, none of whom pan out, doesn't pay anything. Having one prospect and really focusing on him and turning that into an engagement can win plenty of money.
That's excellent, and actually, I appreciate you breaking it down. Doing the math process there, because that is very helpful to get it concretely in my mind what that type of relationship looks like. And that actually is a very natural segue into where I want to go next in terms of our conversation. and that is in your specific strategic client process, how you engage with a client. Now, obviously, in terms of the technical or tactical side of what you do, that type of engagement or that level of engagement is going to be determined by the opportunity, need, desire, challenge, problem of the client themselves. You talked about, in this hypothetical, it's about increasing profitability. Well, there's going to be certain tactical and technical things that you ask about or look into related to that. If it was about, expansion into a new market, or if it was about, some other aspect that falls within your area of expertise, then you might have a different set of technical or tactical questions and due diligence that you would do. But in general, at the strategic level, going one step higher, when you, as a consultant now, thinking about your consulting process, what is it? What does your general strategic client process look like? So when that rainmaker brings you in and you start to have those conversations with that decision maker, how does that begin? What are the general steps of your process? Because there's a lot riding on that opportunity, right? I mean, one thing is you obviously want to produce a successful and valuable result for the client because that's in everyone's best interest, number one. But in order to do that, right, there has to be a rapport, there has to be a trusted relationship that's established, et cetera. So those things have to happen. And then you can get into some of the, again, rolling up the sleeves and doing some of the work. So maybe just give everybody a general outline of what your client engagement process looks like from, I will say start to finish. I'll use that cliche.
I was brought up in a Jesuit parish, so please forgive me if I sometimes use metaphors and parables. But think of a visit to a doctor. Let's say your leg started swelling and you have problems walking. You walk to a doctor, and the first thing he or she does is examines your leg. May ask you to do some squats. May touch the leg. May ask you to bend it, flex it. Turn your foot this way, that way, may send you for a CAT scan or an X-ray. So the doctor performs a diagnostic. The doctor is trying to learn as much as possible what is inside, what is under the skin, without actually using a scalpel to find out. And then once the doctor finds out that, for example, you have some ligaments that are torn, the doctor may decide on treatment, introduce the treatment to you. He may introduce 2 alternative treatments, outline the pluses and minuses of each, ask you to select, perhaps help you make the selection, and then the actual, once you approve it, then the actual healing process begins. Some of it is performed by the doctor, some of it is performed by you at home, some of it may be performed by a nurse or by a physiotherapist. The process, my process is quite similar. So from this non-human part of the equation, I diagnose the company. I try to learn as much as possible about it. Even though I've done about 100 projects, I've never been in exactly the same sector twice. Okay. Yep. So each time I learn about the industry. Sometimes I have to learn a little bit because I've been in an adjacent industry, and sometimes it's completely new to me. And in fact, no, I'll leave that parable to later, if we have the time. So I learn about the industry, I learn about the company. I find out, of course, I do it in part by looking at, for example, financial statements and some other reports, electronic tools. And I do a lot of it by talking to people who work in the company, not just at the top, also at the bottom and anything in between, and by talking to customers, a selection of customers, sometimes talking directly, and sometimes doing it, for example, through a survey where I can cover hundreds of customers at a time. So I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to learn as much as possible, because unless I know what the problem is, it's difficult to solve it. And the very process of talking to the business owner or the CEO and his or her colleagues to some extent builds up the trust. I inform these people that I am not going to squeal on them. In other words, if they say something that may put them in hot water with their boss, I am not going to mention it to the boss. I am a little bit like a confessioner or a lawyer. So I don't pass on the information. I keep it for myself. Of course, the entire picture that I build, I will pass on to the client. Sure. Let's say who is the CEO of the company, but without naming sources. If either the source asks me not to name her, or if I feel that may be detrimental to the source. So this is addressing your question about building trust. I try to do it by showing that I don't know everything about the company, and I am using these people as experts. But also through the conversations, I mean, just like with the doctor is not an expert in your leg. He's never seen your leg before, right? But he has seen other legs. Yeah. So he's the expert in a general leg. You are the expert in your leg. Between the two of you, you are a winning combination, and you can come up with the right treatment. So I don't have a magical way of winning the trust, but I simply do my work and I try to do it well. There was an electrician here earlier this morning to solve some of my problems. This was not his first visit here. He's established, or he's won my trust by simply doing the work, by answering my questions, by being here at an appointed time, or by calling me ahead of time if he was not going to show up, to apologize and to explain. And these are simple things. Right. But many people don't do them.
Right. Yep. And that's also a good reminder, right? Sometimes we overcomplicate the nature of engaging with a client, and at the end of the day, it really is about, number one, having their best interests at heart, and doing the due diligence, being willing to roll up your sleeves and learn, as opposed to being the doctor. And this is not a generalization. It's specific individual doctors that from time to time simply say, oh, I don't need to run the test. I can already diagnose you. I know exactly what it is. And they may or may not be right. In other words, they make the assumption that they're not, to use your metaphor, they make the assumption that their general knowledge, having seen so many legs, automatically applies to yours, when indeed it may or may not. They could be right, but they're not allowing you as the patient to offer your specific expertise in your own leg. And so I think that's an important note that you're alluding to and hitting on there. It is a function of humility, but it's not about being humble for humbleness sake. It's about understanding that you don't know everything and that you do need to roll up your sleeves and learn about the client situation before you can make as good of a diagnosis and treatment plan recommendation as possible.
Absolutely right. And what you mentioned, I do in my work. I mean, given that I have done this so many times, I do draw parallels, and I form a hypothesis. Mm-hmm. That this is going to happen, or this is the reason why something Sure. happened. But first of all, it's a working hypothesis. And then I design tests which will either prove or disprove the hypothesis.
Right.
I don't design tests which will only prove it
yes.
because I want to be right. Yes, right. I want to be right, but I want to be right by discovering the truth. Right. Rather than by excluding all the arguments which work against my hypothesis. So the hypothesis is merely a way of speeding up the process. Because if I did not make the hypothesis, I would be testing every possible reason for something that is happening.
Correct.
And if I have an idea that this is the most likely reason out of 10, then I am just testing this one, and perhaps 80% of the time I'll be right, and I don't have to test the other 9. And if I am wrong, then I have the other 9 that I need to examine and test. Then it takes a little bit longer, but at the end, I end up with the one that is correct.
Right. Exactly. No, it makes perfect sense. It is the scientific method applied to doctoring in our metaphor, applied to consulting in our world, and I think that's really important because I have seen examples and observed them, try not to be a part of them too often, where it is, oh, we've seen this 1,000 times. This is what you're dealing with, knee-jerk answer, and that may or may not affect any kind of meaningful result. Or in certain instances, it could actually be harmful, right? Because we're letting our bias dictate our behavior and our actions, as opposed to letting our knowledge and then our empirical observation dictate our action and our behavior. So I think that's a really important point. So as we move through this process, the next place I'd like to go is discussing, to continue the metaphor, discussing this treatment plan. And so I'm going to ask you to put on your consulting cap here and share some of your expertise. One of the concepts that you and I have spoken about that's most intriguing in my world because of what I do, I'm a little bit selfish here perhaps, is what you do around the world of business development, where I am largely focused in working with my clients on helping them identify new opportunities in the market and attracting new clients. One of your very much areas of expertise is in creating new business from existing client relationships. You were using the mathematical example earlier of a company that has $10 million of gross revenue, 12% net profit, and you made the statement, all things being equal, I can probably go in and find another $1.2 million of profit, whether that's through cost cutting or identifying new sources of revenue within their existing model. I'd love to dive down this rabbit hole a little bit, and maybe you can pull examples from your career where this has happened, and obviously, keep what needs to stay anonymous, of course. But I'd love for you to describe what you generally see. And not necessarily talking about for consultants. We're talking about broad enterprise organizations and companies and industry now. What you normally see as missed opportunities that they have in terms of creating new income from existing client relationships they already have. You can kind of take this part of the conversation wherever you like, Adam, but I'd love to dive into this because I think it's an area that I don't spend enough time with my clients talking about. And probably the reason is because that's not an area where I have a whole lot of expertise. But now that you and I are friends and I'll even say collaborators, I'd love to be able to make those introductions. So maybe, and the same is true for possibly some of the listeners and viewers, maybe dive a little bit deeper into that opportunity that you often see in the clients that you have worked with.
This is an important topic, and in fact, you almost started the conversation with it because you were talking about your colleagues who are either new to the consulting business or who would like to grow it, have more revenues, have more billable hours, and it seemed obvious to you that the way to do that is by getting more clients. And this is also the case in non-consulting companies. Mm-hmm. Getting a new client is sexy. If you are a sales rep, or if you are a sales manager or a sales director, getting new clients is just sexy. I mean, you are a hero if you win a new client. You are not a hero if you just keep the existing client happy. I have a very different approach to it. One of the lessons I got from both my school And in my school at Stanford, in my MBA program, we were taught not just by professors who went up in the academic world, but also we met lots of folks who were owners, founders of companies, sometimes very big companies, and who came and talked with us. So one of the lessons, it's a simple lesson, is that getting an extra dollar of sales from an existing client is much cheaper than getting an extra dollar from a new client.
Yes.
I mean, if you think about it, it seems obvious.
Sure.
But even though it seems obvious to most people, most sales reps and sales organizations will focus on new clients.
That's right.
And I focus on the existing clients. And how do we do that? Well, just one simple example. Let's say you are a company, you are a retail company, say a telecom operator. So you have clients to whom you are providing mobile telephony services. And in the typical model, you grow by losing 10% of your clients every year to the competition, and getting 15% of the clients from your competition. So you grew by 5%. But in order to grow by 5%, you needed to get 15% new clients. Of course, your competitors are trying to do the exact same thing.
Of course.
So they are getting your 10% who departed. And think about it. If you didn't bother trying to get the 15% new ones, you just kept the 10% who left you happy. Mm-hmm. Because people don't change the telecom operator because it's fashionable, because they have nothing else to do. So instead of going to the movies or to a restaurant, they go through the tedious bureaucratic process of filling out these forms, etc., right? Picking a new program, the plan, etc. Most people stay with the telecom operator until the telecom operator pisses them off so badly that they decide to go through this bureaucratic process and go somewhere else.
Sure.
I have been there. I have changed my telecom operators, and every single time it was because they pissed me off.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So the simple trick is not to piss them off. How do you not piss them off? Well, first of all, you find out what pisses them off. And it's easy to find out because usually these pissed off people are very vocal.
I'll tell you.
Yeah. All you have to do is ask them. Right. Sometimes you don't even have to ask them because they are sending the angry emails to you. They are calling your call center.
Right.
And telling about the problem. Yeah. So the trick is simply to listen to the call center, to analyze. Well, first of all, to make the call center available. Because if I am calling the call center and after 15 minutes of listening to music, I prefer silence, and it will be a simple thing because some people prefer music, some people prefer silence.
Give them the option, yeah.
Why not give them the option? Hit 9 if you want to turn off the music.
Right.
I have never, ever heard those words in any call center in Europe or in the United States.
Yeah.
And it's such a simple thing. Okay, so the music turns some people off, including me. So that's a no-brainer. Introduce this option. So you listen to that music for 15 minutes, and every single minute that you are listening to it, you are more and more irritated.
Yes.
And then finally, at the end of 15 minutes, the system cuts you off.
Yep.
I think we've all been through it, whether we are calling an airline or a telecom operator or our provider of, let's say, Netflix.
Sure.
So looking at these touch points, at these channels of communication, not sales communication, customer service communication. So our existing customers. I have been through lots of companies, and I have found very few very few that do it well. Even companies that have, great renown, such as, for example, Amazon. I was one of the first clients of Amazon, but I mean, there are some really basic screw-ups every time I buy a book there, or I look for a book, whether it is Amazon.us, Amazon.co.uk, or Amazon DE, Deutschland, or nowadays Amazon.pl for Poland. The same simple mistakes. So, for example, they are showing me books on the American side, which they will not deliver to Poland. I happen to be living in Poland right now. It would be so simple to put in the filter section, to put a little button, only exclude those that are not deliverable to Poland, that we do not deliver to Poland. So these are, I mean, in every single company, I don't care if it's a gas station or a restaurant, I find these little things that turn people off. And all you have to do is find out what these things are by talking to customers, and then remove them. And most of them are very cheap to remove, very simple to remove. You don't need a PhD, and you don't need millions of dollars. You just need a little bit. So these are, and if you don't lose those 10%,
right,
then you just grew by 10% simply from not losing them.
Right.
Yeah. That's cheaper than winning 10% new clients.
Right. Right.
So this is what I'm talking about, and this is something that I really like to do. You said earlier that I make the companies better organizations. Well, that is the better part of it.
Right.
Yeah. And better results in higher profits, because if you don't lose 10% of your clients or your customers, your profits are suitably higher than they would be if you lost them.
Sure. That makes excellent sense. And so in terms of your process, it really is, in terms of that aspect of your process, it's going in, having those conversations with the organization, collecting that data. Like you said, sometimes those pissed off clients are happy to share with you exactly what the problems are without you even having to ask. But either way, you're doing your due diligence around that analysis of why are we losing people? Where does this attrition come from? What is the core source of it? And then obviously certain things are going to be easier than others, but as a rule, those types of things are usually small things that can be easily remedied. And then it's simply prioritizing them, and then you work with the organization in terms of correcting them. Removing them, correcting them, whatever it may be. And at that point, the numbers will tell us, were we successful or not in terms of removing these things to an extent where someone stays as opposed to leaves.
It's very easy to measure it.
Yeah.
If you lost 10% before the project and you lost 1% after the project,
there you go.
It's easy to measure that metric, and it's also easy to translate that metric into the bottom line. Another opportunity, and one perhaps would be a little bit closer to what you do, is products. When I talk to customers and I ask them questions in the surveys, one of the results I get is what the needs are, which are currently not satisfied by my client, but they could be, because they are neighbors to the product that the client offers. Right? So this again is a missed opportunity from the existing client if you don't add those products. Or options on existing products. And if you do add them, then again, you can be living off the same customer base, just offering them additional products. In fact, what I was talking about with the consultant, who, let's say, provides audit services, so he's an auditor, and he expands the scope to also provide financial analysis, and perhaps even jump off from finance to strategy or to marketing or to operations. By getting these colleagues to these additional keys to the logs. So this is also an example of expanding the scope of your products,
right?
To make more money from the existing clients.
And this is exactly, this precisely ties back to what we were talking about in terms of building out, for a consultant, building out this network of experts that have mastery of areas that you don't have. So now with your own clients as a consultant, you can go in, introduce these other collaborators, partners, experts to provide value through your relationship that you already have. And you are monetizing that. They are monetizing that. The client is happier now than they were before because you're not just solving problem A, you're now solving problem A, B, C, and D. And that's all happening through you. So it's exactly the same. Conceptually, that strategy is right in alignment with exactly what you're talking about. The answer is not always new or more clients, right? Oftentimes the answer comes from the question, how can we provide more value and serve our existing clients better, and make their lives, businesses better, easier, et cetera. That's phenomenal. We're coming up on time, but I want to wrap up with a couple of simple questions. One is simple, one perhaps not so much. The first one, perhaps not. What is a question I ask each guest, and I'm really fascinated to hear your answers. Best lesson or lessons, I won't limit you to one, best or most impactful, most important lessons learned about, it can be about life, but about being a consultant, doing this job of consulting and helping organizations be better. Top lessons learned over your extensive career.
2 + 2 = 5. If you get two people, not clones, but two people who complement each other in their skills, abilities, likes and dislikes, the two together can make more, whether it is money, professional satisfaction, client loyalty, however you want to measure it, but they can create more than the two of them working separately.
Yeah.
And even though I do not have a formal team, I used to have, but then I did some moving around because of my projects, but whatever. So I usually work with at least one other person on every project.
Understood.
And one of the reasons is because they are coming to me with these projects, right? I mean, during the last 20 years, I don't think I got a project by talking directly to the client. I got it by picking up the phone and being available when I was asked to be available. So working with another person is just a great way of doing business in this profession.
That is very affirming to hear. I'm a huge proponent, advocate, and practitioner. I try to be a good practitioner of true collaboration. And certainly in the nature, if you think about the nature of consulting in and of itself, right? A client is coming to a consultant because they know they can't do their best work alone, because they know they can't do their best work without someone else who has some other kind of perspective or position or expertise. They know they can do better with that as opposed to without it. What you're saying is the same in terms of working with someone on a project, finding these collaborators. Rather than trying to go it alone and do it on your own, you can have more fun, but you can have a much bigger impact and do a lot more meaningful and important work with someone along the way. And that's very, selfishly, that's very timely and important for me to hear after starting this new business, just about a couple of years ago, and having gone it alone at the beginning, and now finally getting to a place where I feel comfortable, confident, and I have clarity on how I can collaborate with other people in terms of doing some of the work I'm doing. It is a lot more fun. It is a lot more exciting. And I have found my own experience I can be a lot more effective. I should say we can be a lot more effective working together. So I think that's,
As you were saying it, I was reminded of a particular event. One of my first days at McKinsey, I was assigned to a merger of two large banks, and we were to write a letter. Emails were not that popular at the time yet, so we were to write a letter to the CEO of one of the two banks, to our main client. I was asked to write. It was a half a page letter. Okay, so we are not talking about the Bible or
right.
or a short piece. I spent an hour or two writing it, and then four of us met. Three of them were senior to me, and I had just entered the company. So there was also the partner in charge of one of the country offices of McKinsey. And I remember this conversation, and initially it just shocked me, because the amount of Latin that went across the table. I mean, the slurs, the swear words, the criticism. You idiot! How could you possibly? I mean, that comma must be in front of the word, not after the word. And I was just sitting back and enjoying. And I mean, some of these folks were calling me an idiot. One of them, I remember, a Hungarian guy, and then the Bulgarian guy was saying to him, "You are an idiot. Adam did it right." At the end, after an hour of this really heated discussion, I mean, a few changes were made to what I wrote. It was not huge, but there were some changes. And I thought to myself, baby, you are home. This is your kind of place. Because I was certain that none of the four of us could improve on this final product.
Yes.
I mean, this was, if it wasn't perfection, it was as perfect as any four of us singly or jointly could possibly make it.
Right.
And then it went to the client. And then I understood why our project was 007. In other words, it was the seventh, that was the code of the project. So it was the three letters of the client name and then 007. No relation to James Bond. Just simply happened to be the seventh time that the guy decided to spend lots of money on McKinsey to help him with something. So working as a team, you can accomplish more. Yep.
That's good. That's a great story. Excellent. Last question. If someone is interested in potentially collaborating with you or learning more about what you do, or even potentially bringing you into one of their existing clients because you have expertise that fills a gap that they don't have, someone wants to reach out to you, learn more about your expertise and what you do, what's the best way for them to reach you or contact you or get in touch?
Well, I know of three ways. One is to knock on my door, but that requires a flight across the Atlantic. Another way is to call me, and another way is to write to me.
Okay, very good. And if they wanted to reach out to you online in some way, what would be the email or website, or what should they do? Where should they go?
adam.anderson@exechq.com.
Simple enough. adam.anderson@exechq, the letters HQ, of course, .com.
Or just call Scott, and Scott will put you in touch with me.
That is always available. So yes, if you want to reach out to Adam, you can do so directly, or of course, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to make the introduction.
And actually, let me address one other thing. Since I mentioned that I am in Poland, I have been doing remote work for 20 years. Not all of it is remote, but the type of things that we are talking about, almost all of them can be done remotely. So I actually service clients from the United States without going there. However, if need be, I am 20 minutes from the international airport, and I have on occasion moved to the client's site either for a few days or for a few months, and in some cases with all my belongings. If it made sense and the engagement was long enough. So geography is not a limiting factor here.
Understood. And that's a great insight. Thank you. Listen, Adam, thank you so much for the time, investing the time in me and the listeners and viewers. It was incredibly valuable. I've got 2 pages of notes, as I usually do from our conversations, but I appreciate you being willing to share your expertise, your process, and some fantastic insights with everyone today. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure to talk with you, Scott. Thank you so much for having me.
Very good. We'll do it again. Thank you for listening. I hope you got a ton of value out of this episode. And before we go, I want to thank the sponsor of our show, Smart Solutions Media. Smart Solutions Media empowers business owners, consultants, and other independent professionals to easily attract better prospects and transform them into long-term clients. If you're a B2B consultant or service professional and would like to start filling your pipeline with better quality prospects, visit us on the web at smartsolutionsmedia.com to learn more about what we can do to help you. Be sure to complete the short 2-minute accelerated growth scorecard you can find on the website, and you'll receive a complimentary strategy session where we'll give you specific insights and recommendations to help you attract high-value clients. Until next time, make sure you are consulting with authority.